He sent an invitation to his ex, the woman who had once cleaned his apartment, polished his floors, folded his clothes. He thought it would humiliate her. He thought it would remind her of where she belonged. He had no idea she was coming, with a billionaire ex by her side. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the door of a narrow apartment tucked behind a row of storefronts. Cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind of paper that costs more than the contents inside need to. Her name was printed neatly across the front, perfectly centered, perfectly impersonal. She stood there for a long moment, keys still in her hand, staring at it. She didn't rush to open it. People who have been underestimated for long enough learn to pause. They learn to read intent before ink. She already knew who it was from. Ryan Whitmore. For 3 years, she had cleaned his home. Not a house. An apartment suspended above the city, where the floors gleamed even when no one walked on them, and the windows framed a skyline most people only saw in magazines. She arrived before sunrise, left before lunch, and existed in that quiet space where people forget to notice who keeps their world functioning. She polished surfaces no one thanked her for, folded clothes she could never afford, memorized the rhythms of a life that moved forward whether she was there or not. And then one morning, she was told she was no longer needed. No warning, no explanation that made sense. Just a check, a practice smile, and the phrase people like Ryan used when they wanted to sound reasonable while doing something cruel. "We're going in a different direction." She nodded. She thanked him. She had left without asking questions. That was months ago. The invitation felt heavier than it should have when she finally picked it up. She turned it over once, then again, as if expecting something else to reveal itself. It didn't. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message. Did you get it? It was from Lena, who cleaned offices downtown and knew Ryan's name only because she'd heard it enough times over late dinners and tired conversations. Yes, she typed back. The response came quickly. "You're not actually thinking of going, are you?" She exhaled, slow and measured, then slid her finger beneath the envelope flap and opened it. The invitation was immaculate. Formal language, polished phrasing, no warmth anywhere on the page. Her name appeared alone. No guest, no companion, just her, printed cleanly among people who would never speak to her unless they had to. At the bottom, in smaller type, was the detail that mattered. Table 18. She stared at the number. She had cleaned enough event spaces after weddings ended, after the music stopped and the guests left behind wine-stained linens and discarded programs, to know exactly what Table 18 meant. It was where you placed people who were technically invited but strategically distanced. Far from the couple, far from the power, closed to exits and service doors. The message was subtle. That was Ryan's specialty. Her phone buzzed again. "He's doing this to mock you," Lena wrote. "Everyone knows it." She sat down at the small kitchen table, the invitation laid flat in front of her like evidence. Outside the window, delivery trucks passed, engines straining, people moving through lives that didn't pause to consider intention. She thought back to her last day in Ryan's apartment. How he hadn't looked at her when he spoke. How he'd mispronounced her name and not corrected himself. How invisible she had felt standing in a room that cost more than everything she owned combined. Another call. Lena this time. "You cannot go," Lena said without greeting. "This is exactly what he wants." "I know," she replied calmly. "So why would you let him do this to you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the invitation again. At the deliberate precision. At the confidence behind the cruelty. "He thinks," she said slowly, "that I'll walk in carrying the version of myself he remembers. And won't you?" She stood and crossed the room, stopping at the window. The view wasn't glamorous. Brick walls, fire escapes, a slice of sky framed by utility lines. But it was hers. "No," she said. "I won't." Lena was quiet. "He thinks this will make me feel small," she continued. "Like I should be grateful just to be allowed in the room. And you're not." She allowed herself a faint smile. "I was never small," she said. "I was just unseen." After the call ended, she folded the invitation carefully and placed it beside her calendar. The paper was expensive, confident, certain it understood its own power. So was she. She picked up a pen and circled the date. Not because she wanted revenge, not because she wanted to be noticed, but because some invitations aren't meant to be declined. They're meant to be answered. 3 weeks later, she stood outside the venue alone, a quiet figure against the grandeur of the entrance. The crowd moved in clusters, silk and tailored wool brushing past polished stone. She had chosen a simple dress, nothing that demanded attention, nothing that would scream her presence. But she didn't need it to. Inside, the ceremony space gleamed with intention. White orchids lined every surface. Crystal fixtures caught the afternoon light and fractured it into tiny sparks across the room. Every detail screamed wealth, taste, control. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's elite. And yet, here she was, invited, observed, but meant to remain peripheral. Table 18. She found it immediately, tucked near the service entrance, partially hidden behind a decorative column. The seat assignments were clear. She was not meant to be central, not meant to matter. She sat between two strangers, a quiet elderly couple who didn't offer more than a nod, and a young man absorbed in his phone. She didn't mind. Her vantage point gave her everything she needed. Through the room, she could see him. Ryan Whitmore, groom in polished suit, shoulders back, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed he had orchestrated the entire story. He scanned the crowd as if searching for acknowledgement. His eyes swept past clusters of family, friends, and colleagues, then landed briefly on her. Not with warmth, not with regret. Victory. He thought he had won. She met his gaze for the barest moment. Then she looked away. Let him have it, she told herself. The ceremony unfolded flawlessly. Natalie, radiant and composed, moved through the ritual like someone born into expectation. Vows were exchanged. Applause followed. Every sound in that room was polished, controlled, and predictable. Karen clapped politely, her posture neutral, her face a mask of calm. She was present, and yet entirely untethered from the intended humiliation. Did you know the groom? The elderly woman beside her asked softly. Once, Karen replied. These things are always complicated, the woman said, nodding knowingly. Karen turned her attention back to the ceremony. She had seen enough weddings to recognize the theater. Every gesture, every smile, every orchestrated moment was meant to convey perfection. But she was not here to perform. She was here to witness, and to exist on her own terms. When the ceremony concluded, the guests moved into the garden for cocktails. Karen stayed near the edges, glass of wine in hand, observing. Groups formed in predictable patterns: power, status, money. People clustered around the connections that mattered to them, leaving the rest to drift in polite conversation. She recognized some faces from Ryan's past, people she had cleaned homes and offices for. A few glanced her way, registered recognition, then looked away, uncomfortable. Some whispered. She expected it. And then she noticed the subtle shift in the staff. The wedding planner's voice crackled over her radio, the way she straightened her shoulders, abandoned casual conversation mid-sentence. The venue manager moved with purpose, abandoning routine. Something had changed. Karen's fingers tightened around the wine glass. She sensed it before anyone else did. Someone important had arrived. He walked in without fanfare. No announcement. No flourish. Dark suit. No tie. Nothing ostentatious. He moved as if he belonged, not because he needed recognition, but because recognition was irrelevant to him. The wedding planner intercepted him briefly, a polite smile hiding tension. Karen couldn't hear the exchange, but she saw the instant relief in her posture when he nodded, said something brief, then continued walking straight toward table 18. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. You didn't tell me the seats were this bad, he said quietly. Karen's lips curved slightly. I wanted to see if you'd complain. I don't complain, she replied softly. I acquire better venues around them. The room began to shift without anyone else noticing. Conversations stumbled. Phones were pulled from pockets, not for photos, but for confirmation. Recognition spread subtly, a ripple of realization passing through those who understood who had arrived. And across the room, Ryan Whitmore remained oblivious. Yet his gaze kept darting toward them, scanning for a sign. A flicker of unease crossed his expression, a prelude to what was coming. Karen sat back, calm. She watched. She was no longer invisible. The shift was almost imperceptible at first. Guests moved, unconsciously sensing a change. Conversations thinned, laughter paused mid-sentence. Phones tapped, eyes darted. Karen noticed it before anyone else. The staff knew. They straightened, moved with renewed purpose. Something important had entered the room, and the atmosphere tightened around it like a held breath. He stepped forward. Elliot Vaughn. No fanfare. No grand entrance. Dark suit, no tie, simple shoes. Nothing screamed power. And yet, everything about him radiated it. The room didn't need to announce his arrival. The subtle recognition in every glance, every pause, every small movement of the staff made it obvious. The wedding planner met him briefly at the entrance, professional composure masking tension. Karen observed every second. When Elliot nodded once, they relaxed, returned to their duties. He moved deliberately, effortlessly, and stopped beside her at table 18. "You didn't tell me the seats were this bad," he said quietly, as if commenting on the decor. Karen's lips curved. "I wanted to see if you'd complain." "I don't complain," he replied. "I acquire better venues around them." His presence alone shifted the room. The ripple moved outward, subtle at first. A woman near the bar whispered something, and a man immediately pulled out his phone. Another guest took a small step back. Recognition spread silently. Elliot Vaughn. The name carried weight in ways few understood, but everyone felt it. Across the room, Ryan's posture stiffened. He had not expected this. The rehearsed smile faltered. His eyes scanned, confused, then registered. A flicker of panic, quickly masked, but visible to anyone who knew where to look. "Wait," someone murmured near the bar. "Is that?" Karen observed quietly. Let them wonder, she thought. Let the room recalibrate. Elliot's presence was a statement without words. No introductions, no explanations, no arrogance. Just a quiet authority that demanded recognition. And for the first time, Karen felt the room's attention shift. Not toward Ryan, not toward the wedding spectacle, but toward her table, toward her. Ryan Whitmore approached, rehearsed charm in place, but tension in every line of his face. "Karen," he said, carefully measured. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Congratulations," she replied simply. Her gaze did not falter. Ryan's eyes flicked toward Elliot, then back. I don't believe we've met," he said, forcing a handshake. Elliot Vaughn. Elliot did not rise. The handshake was minimal, polite, and deliberate. "Last-minute addition," he said. Ryan's smile froze. The color drained from his face. The realization spread. This was not a coincidence. This was strategy, and he had no control over it. Karen interrupted gently. "The seating is fine. We're comfortable here." Ryan looked at her, comprehension dawning. This wasn't about her proving anything alone. This was a demonstration. A quiet shift in power that left him scrambling to reassert authority in a room that no longer revolved around him. He excused himself, muttering rehearsed phrases about needing to reconnect with family. But his trajectory was clear. Recognition, fear, calculation, all wrapped in a veneer of civility. Karen's eyes met Elliot's. "This is mine," she said firmly. Elliot leaned back slightly, giving space, but never leaving. He didn't need to. The room had already acknowledged the new dynamic. The ripple of influence had begun, and Karen, once meant to be invisible, was no longer just a guest. The energy in the room had shifted entirely, though no one yet spoke of it aloud. Conversations stumbled, laughter became cautious, and the subtle hierarchy of the evening quietly rearranged itself. People who had been certain of their place suddenly hesitated, scanning the room, reassessing. Ryan Whitmore's composure was strained. His rehearsed charm cracked in tiny, almost imperceptible ways. He excused himself from his father-in-law mid-conversation, returning with forced politeness, but his eyes betrayed unease. Across the room, he noticed the subtle glances, the quiet acknowledgement, the way names whispered near the bar were quickly verified on phones. Recognition had a weight that no rehearsal could counter. Elliot Vaughn remained calm, seated beside Karen. He did not need to speak loudly. A nod, a small gesture, a polite acknowledgement. These were enough to shift attention, to draw curiosity and respect alike. Questions were asked politely, then left unanswered. He let the room lean forward, wondering, calculating, trying to measure the man who chose to enter without theatrics but still commanded notice. Karen observed it all. She did not need to speak. She did not need to explain herself. The room's recalibration was her quiet victory. The people who had assumed she would arrive humiliated, isolated, uncomfortable, they were wrong. Every subtle gesture, every stolen glance, every whispered name reinforced what she already knew. She was no longer invisible. Ryan approached again, attempting to mask his unease. His smile, carefully practiced, faltered under the weight of the realization. "Karen," he said again, with just enough warmth to seem natural, "I'm glad you could come." "Thank you for the invitation," she replied simply, her voice calm, measured. She did not offer anything more. She did not need to. His eyes flicked toward Elliot, then back to her. He sensed the shift, the undercurrent of control he could no longer claim. He nodded stiffly, retreating with a grace he did not feel. Every step carried the tension of someone realizing the room no longer revolved around him. Around the table, others began to engage differently. Guests who had assumed Karen's presence would be insignificant now leaned in, curious. They spoke politely, with deference that had not been required before. Elliot deflected questions with practiced ease, never rude, never fully engaged, yet every response reinforced the quiet authority he carried. Even Natalie, radiant in her perfection, glanced toward the table more than once, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Not fear, not resentment, just awareness that the balance of attention had subtly shifted, and there was nothing she could do to influence it. Karen took a slow breath. She let the room's energy wash over her, noting each reaction, each subtle recalibration. The humiliation intended for her had not arrived. It had been replaced by curiosity, by recalculated respect, by awareness. She did not gloat. She did not boast. She simply existed, present in a way she had never been before at an event designed to diminish her. And slowly, deliberately, she smiled. Not at him, not at Ryan, not at the crowd. At herself. She had walked into a room meant to make her feel small, to remind her of what she had lost. Instead, she had arrived with presence, with calm, with quiet assurance. And in doing so, she had changed the narrative. The ripple continued. Heads turned, whispers followed, subtle nods of acknowledgement. Ryan Whitmore, once confident in his control, now moved through the room with cautious calculation, forced charm failing against the invisible authority Karen and Elliot carried together. The shift was complete, and it had been achieved without confrontation, without words, without fanfare. Dinner had begun, yet the energy around table 18 was no longer ordinary. Conversations leaned subtly toward them, not because they sought attention, but because the room now acknowledged authority it could not ignore. Questions, compliments, introductions, all met with poised deflection or quiet confidence. Elliot handled it effortlessly, and Karen observed, calm, detached, present. Across the room, Ryan Whitmore moved with increasing discomfort. Every glance at Karen's table, every whispered confirmation, every phone lifted to search his name, reminded him that the narrative he had carefully curated for years was no longer under his control. He had invited her to mock her, to show her the limits of what she could be. And she had arrived, composed, unshaken, untouchable. When the toasts began, Ryan's voice carried across the room. He praised his bride, told a rehearsed story meant to charm the guests, and then his eyes found Karen. The brief pause in his smile revealed the tension he felt. She did not respond with anger or triumph. She simply listened, acknowledging his words with quiet composure, letting him speak while the room absorbed the truth of her presence. Elliot leaned slightly closer. "Say the word, and I'll buy this venue," he whispered, half joking. Karen allowed herself a quiet laugh. Genuine, unforced. "No," she said. "Let him have his moment." The dancing began. Ryan and Natalie moved across the floor with practiced perfection. The crowd gathered, applauding. Karen rose, preparing to leave, moving with purpose, her posture confident. The crowd instinctively parted, sensing the authority she now carried. She approached Natalie first. Warmly, sincerely. "You look beautiful. Congratulations." Natalie blinked, surprised, unprepared for kindness in a room defined by rivalry and expectation. "Thank you," she said softly. Then Karen turned to Ryan. "Thank you for the invitation," she said calmly. Pause. "I'm glad you found what you were looking for." There was nothing more to say. No triumphalism. No anger. Just closure. She turned, walking back to Elliot, who stood waiting, composed, his presence steady and grounding. They left together, The valet bringing a simple, unassuming car. Not flashy, not ostentatious, just theirs. She glanced back once at the venue, at the celebration continuing behind the windows, at the ripple her presence had caused. You think he knew? Elliot asked quietly. Karen shook her head. No, he would have disinvited me if he had. He only notices things that directly affect him. They drove in comfortable silence, the city lights blurring past. Karen's phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize. Natalie. I wanted to thank you for what you said tonight and apologize if the seating was uncomfortable. I didn't handle the guest list. Karen stared. She typed back simply, no apology necessary. I hope you have a wonderful marriage. Truly. The response came quickly. I looked you up after you left. I understand now why Ryan never spoke of you. You're impressive. Karen set the phone aside. There was nothing to say, nothing to prove. Elliot appeared beside her. Everything okay? Everything's fine, she said, her eyes on the city outside. Quiet, contained. Hers. For years, Ryan had definned.